So I want to start off by saying welcome back to the channel, and if you're new here, welcome. If you're a fanatic of everything entertainment, then this is the channel for you, but in today's movie review, we'll be talking about 1994's The Crow. So let's get into it. So one cannot bring up 1994's The Crow without talking about Brandon Lee, which tragically passed away during the filmmaking process of this film. He unfortunately died to a gunshot to the stomach, which was very unfortunate. And it sucks that this still happens to this day. You know, here recently with Rust, I believe, with Alec Baldwin, which I don't know. It's hard to believe that that stuff still happens. This was pretty recent. You know, with Rust, it was a few years ago, and then with The Crow, it was 30 years ago. But you know, this film always had that baggage with it. You know, everyone always said this was Brandon Lee's film, and I 100% agree. You know, he is what made this film this film. You know, he was the best part about this film, which we'll get into that, you know, here later. But I just want to say rest in peace to Brandon Lee. But before we get into it, I want to show you a couple things, and then we'll get into the positives, mixed, and negatives with this film. First up, if you're a big physical media collector, you guys know how hard it was to find this. This is the Walmart 4K steelbook of The Crow. I love it. I showed it off in my 4K collection, and I talked about how hard it was to get it. But I absolutely love the way this looks. You got Brandon Lee on the front. Once you take the slip off, I love this. And then it's the same as the back, you know. But I really love this release. I'm glad I found it 2 or 3 weeks later in my Walmart, which is really weird because usually I have to drive to other Walmarts to find it. So this was a nice surprise because when I saw it, I was like, babe, I gotta go get it. Thankfully, it was only 25, and I think it's worth 25 because you go anywhere else, people are like scalping it. They're selling it for 60 $70, so I'm glad I got it for 25. And then one more thing, I got the original graphic novel by James O'Barr. It's the special edition, so I believe it has 2 or 3 stories in it. I'm not entirely sure, but it does have 30 pages of never before seen artwork, including a new closing segment called Sparkle Horse, and the touching new scene in August Noel, and the new introduction by James O'Barr, and lost sequences restored using the artist's original technique, which I thought was really cool. But either this is the original, which it is the original, but I don't know if there's 2 or 3 stories added or not. But I really love this graphic novel. It is my favorite. I don't read many graphic novels, but this absolutely has to be my favorite. Does this movie deserve to be called a classic? Well, let's get into it. First, let's get into the positives with 1994's The Crow. Like I said before, one cannot talk about this film without talking about Brandon Lee, which is the best part about this film. He made this character this character. You know, if you think about The Crow, if you think about Eric Draven, you automatically think about Brandon Lee. So, you know, his performance is great. There are times where some people may say it's cheesy, but I think it really fits with the film. I love his one-liners. I love the depressing nature to it as well. You know, this is a very depressing story, which I'll get into that in a minute. But Brandon Lee, this was a performance of a lifetime. Unfortunately, this was his last film, but I think, you know, if this was your last film, I think he'd be proud of himself. And it does make you wonder, you know, where Brandon Lee would be now if he was still with us, you know. But it's very tragic that he passed while making this film, and then his dad passed while making a you know, his last film, which I forgot what it was. But I hate that it's like father, like son. I hate that. But it makes you wonder where Brandon Lee would be now. But, you know, can't not talk about The Crow without talking about Brandon Lee, and absolute best part about this film. Another thing that I'm a fan of is the story in here. It is a revenge story. I'm not really one for revenge type films, sort of like, you know, The Last House on the Left or I Spit on Your Grave. Those are type of things that I can't handle because it gets too much into certain things. But it does touch upon that with this film, but I think they do it better. I hate whenever there's like a rape revenge story and films show it, which unfortunately, you know, people came into Eric and Shelley's apartment and raped and murdered Shelley and then just murdered Eric, which just implied it, which I think movies need to do that. They don't really need to show anything because once you imply it, you know, you already hate the bastards for it and now you really want to see them die. So I love the story behind this one. I love that he gets his revenge and, you know, he avenges his wife or soon to be wife because they were going to get married the next day because this film is set, or they died on October 30th, I believe, the day before Halloween. So really heartbreaking story, but really great revenge tale at the same time. And another thing that people bring up about this film is the vibe and aesthetic of this film. You know, Alex Proyas, or Proyas, I believe that's how you pronounce it, the director, he has a really great eye for imagery. You know, like this and Dark City, he did great on that. But this was a one of a kind, and it still is a one of a kind movie when it comes to the vibe and aesthetic. There's no other film that quite looks like this. I love the dark scenes in here. I love the way that the city looks. This is just a film that no other film can really touch when it comes to the vibe and aesthetic. I love the way this film looks, and I saw a interview with Brandon Lee before he passed, and he was like, "I wish we shot this in black and white, but the studios didn't let us do that, and then shoot the flashback scenes in color, which I think would have been really nice." But I think watching, if you did watch this film in black and white, just turn the color off on your TV, I think it might look a lot better. I might have to do that soon, but I think it would capture the aesthetic a lot more. They wanted to be really faithful to the graphic novel because it is in black and white, which I really love that. I love black and white films. But anyways, the vibe and aesthetic in here, the way the city looks, is just one of a kind. I love it. Another thing that I love about this film is the chemistry between Brandon Lee and then Ernie Hudson's character. I think they are the best. It's one of the best. It's not a buddy cop film, but they do have some one-liners back and forth. They do have some heartbreaking scenes together, but I think their chemistry was great. And it's still nice to see Ernie Hudson still talk about Brandon Lee in recent interviews and talk about how down to earth he was, and how amazing of a person he was. But you can tell they really loved each other, or really liked each other, and really loved working with each other in here, because some of their scenes are my favorite. Like, every time they're on screen together, it is some of my favorite scenes in here. Like, especially the scene after Eric Draven says, "Is that gasoline I smell?" and he blows that place up, and then Ernie Hudson's character pulls up because he's the cop. And, they have some really funny lines together in that scene. And then later on, they have a very heartbreaking scene where Eric Draven comes to Ernie Hudson's apartment and talks about what happened to Shelley and sees what happened, because once he touches someone he can see what happened. They had some really fun scenes toward the end as well, even though it was a bit heartbreaking on both ends. And then my last positive has to be them bringing Brandon Lee back to life, which was very, very early CGI, and you can definitely tell with this 4K release. You can tell a lot more, because there are times when Eric Draven is walking upstairs and his body is moving like this, sort of, and you can see that the face is not fully aligned with it either. And there's this one shot where he's running on a rooftop, and there's a couple like that, and you can tell it's CGI. And there's this one that you see with the window, and it's the lightning, and then you see his face pop up. That was a very, very early CGI, and if you didn't know what happened to Brandon Lee, you'd be like, "Huh, that looks a bit weird." I'm not a fan of that. But since it was 1993, they started doing these effects and releasing it in 94. You can't help but respect that. Usually with a film like this, like with Furious 7, it is very noticeable, and I sort of put that in the mix. But I'm putting the positives because this is like the first time that ever happened, and I think they do it justice. It is a bit odd, but I'm a fan of it. So with that being said, let's move on to the mixed aspects of this film. So my main thing that I have to bring up is some of the side villains in here. At times they are very threatening, but there are some scenes where they are very cringe, especially the "light it up, light it up, light it up." Those scenes, like every time they do that, man, I'm just like, you're threatening and all, and I would hate to be in the same room as you, but if you do that again, I'm going to smack shit out of you. Like, it was just very annoying during those parts. But I think for the most part, like I said, they are threatening at times. That's why I'm putting in the mixed aspects, because I do see the good and bad in it. But another thing that I'm mixed on is the performance of Sarah, which is the little girl in here. I think she's a fine actress. I think she does really good. But, I really like her narration in here. There's just some scenes in here where her acting and line delivery and lines are very mixed for me. Like, hot dogs make you fart big time. Like that. I was like, is this supposed to be dark and serious? And I mean, you can put humor in a film like this. Like Brandon Lee and then Ernie Hudson have some scenes together that are very humorous, but it fits. With her, I'm like, that line, no, we could have done without that. But for the most part, she does okay. It's just some of the lines that they give her and some of the line deliveries I'm not entirely a big fan of, but I'm sure that she's gone on to do better things. I'm not entirely sure. And she's probably become a better actress, which I think this was like her first or second film. I'm not entirely sure. She does decent in here. It's just some of the things that give her to do and say. Another thing that I mixed on is Michael Wincott's performance as Top Dollar, and he's good in here for the most part. But once again, there are some lines that they give this man, and for the most part, those lines are very mixed in my opinion. I can't think of none right off the top of my head because I watched this like a week ago, but I'm not the best at remembering things. But he is a good villain, but he could have been a lot more threatening, you know? I wish we had a few more scenes with him, but it's just his demeanor throughout the whole thing. I'm very mixed on it because he is like sinister and very threatening, but at times he has some of these one-liners once again that just don't entirely work for me. So with that being said, let's move on to the negatives with this film. I am going to mispronounce this woman's name, so I'm going to try my best, but Bailing or Bailing's performance as Micah, which is Top Dollar's sister. They don't look like each other, but I guess, which is a really weird relationship once once that line comes out, you already see what they do beforehand. But her performance, it is very shallow and monotone and a bit dry. I'm not a fan of it, which is really weird because you look at the behind the scenes and she's doing some of the special features. She talks like a normal person. I don't know if that was the direction they wanted her to go, but it was a bit weird in my opinion where she was just, I like the eyes or whatever she said, and I'm like, that's what you want her doing throughout the whole movie. Yeah, I wasn't a fan of her performance, but like I said, it was really weird because you watch the behind the scenes and she does really good. I don't know. I'm And then the last thing I'm negative on is Angel David's performance as Skank. One, why is it his name? Two, why does he remind me of the dude from the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre? And three, why that performance? Not a fan. Every time he was on screen, I rolled my eyes. There was one part where I did laugh at his performance, and that was when Eric Draven had him towards the end of the film, and he's like, I'm looking for Skank, and he's like, Skank's dead. That made me laugh, but every other time that he was on screen, not a fan of it. But with that being said, I just wanted to come on here and, talk about The Crow leading up to the new one that's coming out Thursday, because I am seeing it Thursday at 9:05 p.m. after work. So, yeah, I do believe this film does deserve to be called a classic. There are some scenes in here that are very cringe, very dated, but I can't help but enjoy it. And that's why I'm going to be giving 1994's The Crow an overall grade of an 84%. So with that being said, you guys let me know what you think about this film. Do you find this to be a classic? Is this one of your favorite films of all time? Because I have run into a few people where they say this is one of their favorite films of all time. And I can totally get it, aside from my mixed and negative aspects. There are some things that I wish they would have changed, but overall, I think this is a really good film, and I do think it still holds up. I regret not seeing it in theaters because they did have the re-release a few months ago whenever the 4K came out, but I opted with the 4K, and I think that was a great option anyways, because the 4K does look great, but you're not here to talk about the 4K, you're here to listen to me talk about the movie. So yes, this film does deserve to be called a classic, and if you're a really big fan of it, I hope I did this review justice. But with that being said, I just want to say thank you guys, as always, for watching my videos, and I'll see you in the next one.